Good evening. Good evening on YouTube. Good evening as well in Iceland and in UK. Today we have a match between two teams. We'll be debating in the Inter-University Law Debate Tournament organized by the Coax Foundation. I give the floor to my colleague, Ms. Urbanova.
Thank you very much, and good evening and good afternoon, and welcome everyone to today's match in the round 2 of the Hague Inter-University Law Debate Tournament 2024. Today we have the debaters from University of Manchester in Great Britain and debaters from University of Akureyri joining us from Iceland. The teams will debate on the statement they've received 7 days in advance, specifically on whether or not international trade laws and regulations, unlike the ones on national level, lack effective mechanisms to enforce compliance, undermining their legitimacy and impact. Well, the teams prepared for both positions will know in a short while which team will defend in favor and which team will defend against positions. But before we go to that part, it is time to learn a bit more about our students today. So first giving the floor to University of Manchester's debating team, Mr. Atassi. The floor is yours.
Hello, my name is Abdullah Tassi. I'm 18 years old and a first-year law student.
Thank you and welcome. From University of Akureyri, Ms. Hrafnhildur, the floor is yours.
Thank you. My name is Hrafnhildur Föningilsdóttir, and I am a first-year polar law student and have finished my bachelor's in law.
Thank you and welcome. Giving the floor back to University of Manchester, Ms. Diallo.
Hi everyone, my name is Zara Diallo and I'm a third-year law student, and it's my pleasure to be here with you today.
Thank you and welcome. Giving the floor now to University of Akureyri, Ms. Ashlock.
Hi, my name is Emma Ashlock. I'm a first-year polar law student at the University of Akureyri. I'm originally from Anchorage, Alaska.
Thank you and welcome. Back to UK, Mr. Dionisi.
Hi everyone, my name is Adalberto Dionisi. It's a pleasure meeting you, and I'm a third-year law student.
Thank you and welcome. So in a short while, you will see the allocation wheel for the positions during the debate. And if you could just give me a confirmation when you can see the screen.
Yes.
Thank you. So without further ado. All right, so for today's debate, it will be debaters of University of Manchester arguing in favor of the debate statement, and the University of Akureyri's debating will argue in against position. So to clarify and to confirm, international trade laws and regulations, unlike the ones on national level, lack effective mechanisms to enforce compliance, undermining their legitimacy and impact, will be argued by University of Manchester's debating team, and the University of Akureyri will argue that the position is not correct and thus in against. All right, now there are 5 more minutes to finalize your preparations, and afterwards we'll start with the position in favor. Feel free to close your cameras and review your notes. Thank you very much. Your time is now up for the finalization of your preparations. Just a short reminder, if you see a yellow card, it means you still have 30 seconds left of your speaking time. If you see a red card, it means your speaking time is up, but you can still conclude your sentences comfortably. All right. Thus, giving the floor to the debating team of University of Manchester for your opening statement in favor, you have 4 minutes.
Dear esteemed judges and participants, our argument today will be that international trade laws and regulations lack mechanisms to enforce compliance, undermining their legitimacy and impact. Firstly, I will address the lack of equality when it comes to different nations with different political capitals. Certain nations are able to pick and choose what to follow and not to face ramifications, or the ramifications are acceptable to them for the gain that they can get from ignoring these rules. Inequality before the law violates the core principles of rule of law, undermining the legitimacy of these laws. If you cannot have a law that is equal upon all, then it is not legitimate. Zara will continue by explaining how the concept of retaliation further delegitimizes these trade laws and grants even more impunity to larger WTO member states. Finally, Adalberto will talk about how even in the best case scenario, where nations are of the same economic and political status, the prescribed remedies are ineffective, truly undermining the impact of these trade laws. For the sake of this debate, I will be mostly focusing on the WTO and the trade regulations that come out within that, for the sake of time and as it is the largest organization for trade deals. However, the principles talked about and proven today will and can apply to all trade rules and regulations. First, we have to look at the mechanisms that the WTO uses to uphold these laws and regulations. Firstly, it can force countries to withdraw their measures that are inconsistent with their agreements. Secondly, it can implement temporary remedies. Or thirdly, it can demand compensation. Now, we need to see how effective and how well countries respond to this in order to actually see if they are effective. Countries that have failed to comply in a timely manner within the first decade of the WTO's existence included the United States, members of the European Union, Canada, Japan, and Australia. And according to a report titled Compliance Problems in WTO Dispute Settlement by William Davey, these countries often failed to comply in cases, and their on-time implementation was 50%. Now, developing countries achieved a higher on-time implementation rate of around 30% more. So it's clear that we can see these rules aren't applying to everything. What does this really look like in the real world? In the sense that some of these remedies can often take 2 to 3 years. I mean, if we look at the case of DS-615, where the United States was was accused of being in breach of certain international trade laws when it comes to the importing of computer semiconductor chips. Now, in a situation where that remedy could take 2 to 3 years, the United States is more than likely to accept some form of penalty, some form of punishment, or being told that they can no longer do it. Because for those 18 to 24 months, they can sit there and get cheap semiconductors within their country, bolstering their economy. That cannot apply to all. That doesn't apply to all countries. That inequality fundamentally breaches a key issue with these laws in the sense that they are not equally applied to all. And if you cannot have laws that are equally applied to everyone, then these laws are illegitimate. And therefore, as the motion says, the mechanisms that enforce these compliance undermine the legitimacy of the regulations themselves. Now, unless opposition is able to prove to us that there is a way that all of these nations are held to an equal standard and all of these regulations and all of these measures are done in an instantaneous or in a manner that doesn't affect different countries in a different way and keeps them all to the same standard, then they will be unable to prove their side of the story. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now for the position against the debating team of University of Akureyri, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you very much. Good evening. Today we're going to be taking the stance that international trade mechanisms are not lacking efficiency to enforce compliance, and that national legal systems would face the same problems which plague the international legal trade system. Before we delve into our point of argument, we will be defining the parameter of our arguments. What is almost synonymous with international trade law is the World Trade Organization, or WTO, which has 166 states as members, and on those grounds we found it only apt to focus on the WTO laws and regulations. Our definition of trade will be exclusive to the trade of goods between states. To support our point, we will firstly argue that the laws and regulations are effective even if they are bad actors, which might bend or even break said laws and regulations. Secondly, that the globalization of the world has left states vulnerable with regards to trade without an international legal trade system. Thirdly, that cooperation of states is needed for the international trade mechanisms to work, but it does not mean that the system is ineffective. On to our first argument. The WTO states that 90% of dispute settlements that are brought before it are complied with respect to state sovereignty. That is a rather high percentage, as there will always be the outlier of the bad actor. This month, the 13th Ministerial Conference of the WTO was concluded, and it addressed a lot of criticism that the WTO has gotten over the years in its Abu Dhabi
The timer has been paused until the speaker can be back online.
There is need for cooperation between states and...
Apologies, you were cut off at Abu Dhabi. If you can restart, the timer has been paused.
Okay, wait. Excuse me. Abu Dhabi Ministerial Declaration and making calls for recommendation from member states in the draft of the ministerial decision on the dispute settlement reforms. International trade is a hard subject to handle, as there is need for cooperation between states, and throw into the mix geopolitics and it becomes even harder to manage. Onto the second argument, no state has left the WTO, even though Russia threatened to leave when it lost its most favored nation status in 2022 because of the Ukrainian war. A recent and high-profile example of a state leaving a regional intergovernmental organization that had special regional trade agreement is when the United Kingdom, excluding Northern Ireland, left the EU, or the European Union. This caused food security issues in one of the superpowers in the world today, because in today's world, most nations rely on each other for their necessities. Globalization has been akin to the transformation of humans from jack of all trades towards specialization when urbanization began. I would also like to add on the UK's argument that equality does not necessarily mean equity for everyone. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. This concludes the opening statements from both teams. We are now proceeding into the rebuttals. So starting with the position in favor, University of Manchester debate team, you have 2 minutes.
The opposing team, thank you for your argument. The opposing team mentioned that states rely on each other when it comes to trade. However, and as I will argue, some states have a larger market size than other states, and it is in their interest to violate certain World Trade Organization's rules, and in turn, smaller states have no effective compliance mechanism to induce these states to uphold their obligation. So I will now focus on a mechanism of the World Trade Organization known as the dispute settlement mechanism. This is a mechanism whereby where a state fails to uphold its international obligation of a trade agreement, then the party affected may bring a claim against it. However, this is ineffective for 3 reasons. First, the respondent state has an option to either follow the recommendations by the dispute settlement body, but these recommendations are not binding and are just recommendations. Secondly, it may issue compensation to the injured state. However, this will not stop it from further breaching its obligations. However, under Article 22 of the Dispute Settlement Understanding, the affected party may retaliate against that state by upholding certain concessions that it allowed it to have in the past. However, this is not a very effective mechanism for compliance because in disputes, most states have unequal market sizes. And so in the case of Antigua and Barbuda versus the United States, it was found that even if Antigua wanted to suspend all trade with the United States, it only accounted for $180 million of the United States annual revenue, and that would not stop the United States from further breaching its obligations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For the first rebuttal in the position against, University of Akureyri's debate team, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you for that rebuttal. We would though argue that if small states have a hard time in an international legal framework, they would have an even harder time of gaining traction in the international field if they were by themselves negotiating trade deals between other nations, and might even get forgotten. The time frame mentioned in the starting statement was that the dispute settlement system had a long time to process each case that went before it, but national courts have an even, in some cases, even longer time, which I cannot imagine that will anything but, when it comes to trades, exacerbate the problem. There are always starting hiccups. I mean, the WTO was started in 1994 with the GATT agreement, even though there was the older GATT agreement, but at least they have the organization as such was started in 1994. And it has made great strides towards trying to fulfill its goals with complying with the sustainable development goals of the United Nations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. For the second rebuttal, University of Manchester's debate team, you have 2 minutes.
Yes, can I confirm I'm audible?
Yes, you are.
Yes, so thank you for your rebuttal. I wanted to first reply to the point that developing countries are better off with an agreement rather than with nothing. Initially, the GATT agreement, which then developed into the WTO, by removing but with its non-discrimination clause and by removing the most favored nation clause, was essentially forcing developing countries to enter a world market in which they weren't ready to enter. So I would disagree with the statement. I also wanted to add that the WTO enforcement mechanism fails not only when countries differ significantly in economic and political power, but even in conflicts at arm's length. So the remedy of retaliation, which are talked about by means of tariff, quotas or duties, they are rarely effective in inducing changes in the other members' position. And this is supported by a 2007 study. It's called Economic Sanctions Reconsidered by Gary Clyde Hubauer. And it has shown that economic sanctions achieve their intended outcome only about 1/3 of the time. There's an example, it's the European Community hormones case. When starting in the 1980, the European Community banned hormone-treated beef, and it affected numerous beef exporting countries. And although retaliatory measures by the United States began in 1999, the EU only changed its policy and started accepting hormone-treated beef in 2009. So this signals that the remedy of retaliation is ineffective even between members of similar economic power. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For the second rebuttal in the against position, University of Akureyri's debate team, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. I want to bring us back to what the core of this statement is, that international trade laws and regulations are, because of their ineffective mechanisms to enforce compliance, undermine their legitimacy and impact. That is what we're trying to argue here. Although it is very nice, it's of course important to be talking about equality, and important to be talking about the differences between developing nations and major countries. The core of the argument is the legitimacy and impact of enforcement compliance. 90% of disputes right now in the WTO are enforced. The 10% that aren't, of course, that's unfortunate. Of course, there is a need for enforcement to happen, but the fact is it's 10% versus 90%. And that's a fact that's being ignored. Additionally, I want to bring it back to the equality conversation. Developing nations that don't have rigorous trade regulations at the national level are fundamentally discounting potentially the equality of their workers and the equality of their citizens. International laws and trade regulations bring a higher standard to not only developing nations, but also to larger nations as a whole. It's fundamental cooperation of states that is needed at the international level. Also almost lost my breath there. It's fundamental trade mechanisms that work at the international level. Now, not 100% effective, and we will concede to that point, but still 90% effective. Additionally, even at national levels, even at regional levels, there are still going to be issues in all of these different cases. And the fact remains that there is a higher standard altogether for all the nations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This concludes the rebuttals, and we are now nearing the end of the debate. Starting with the position in favor, University of Manchester's debate team, you have 2 minutes for your conclusion.
Yes, I'm just going to quickly rebut to the points of my esteemed colleague. Firstly, cooperation between countries cannot be this cannot be the case when smaller states can never retaliate against bigger states. This was a point in the report cited by Abdullah. And also wanted to say that the data on implementation is not necessarily a point in favor, because it depends, again, how long it takes to implement it, and in what way then these decisions are actually implemented. And the fact that they cannot be implemented through international law remedies such as cessation and reparation, because we're talking essentially about a bilateral agreement in most of the time. And to summarize, we have argued that the political mechanisms of enforcement of the WTO rules are inadequate to enforce compliance. Abdullah has shown that international trade law does not apply equally to all countries. Zara has shown that this in practice happens when the remedies of WTO breaches, in particular retaliation, cannot be used to the same extent by different countries, different economic and political power. And in that, I've argued that relying solely on political mechanisms to enforce complaints can never be as effective as legal obligations, since even bigger countries can essentially ignore their retaliation measures if it makes sense for them to do so politically and economically. In the end, without equality in the WTO systems, you cannot get legitimacy and the rule of law to enforce its obligations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For a second conclusion, this time from the side of the team of University of Akureyri, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. And this has been a really wonderful debate, and just thank you to everyone who has been participating. My final conclusion that I want to talk about is just a direct rebuttal, not only to the case as a whole, but to the individual who spoke right before me. International law does not need to be equitable. International law does not need to be equal. That is the case. That is how the world works, unfortunately. The key is, how can we make efforts to make it more equitable? How can we make efforts to make it more equal? And our team argues that the WTO does in fact do that. Previous to the WTO, developing nations had to rely solely on bilateral agreements or small regional corporations agreements that didn't necessarily do those jobs. And although, again, 90% of the disputes are solved, 10% are not. The fact is, disputes are being solved. Agreements are being made in favor of developing nations and non-developed and more developed nations. We also have to remember one of the primary reasons that countries are allowed to not agree and not go with the dispute is a case of sovereignty. The United Nations and all other international laws, it comes down to sovereignty. The international community can only do so much when it comes to countries giving up their sovereign rights to make decisions. And whether it's a developing nation or a developed nation, when you take away those sovereign rights, you're taking away the abilities for countries to make decisions for themselves. Obviously, the WTO is a flawed international organization. However, there are efforts to being made to create a more equitable and equal system. And by taking away the WTO altogether, you're going to be losing out on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This now marks the end of your debate match. You can relax, take a sip of water. You are no longer graded after this part. Good job to the both teams. Well done on your match. Well done for the participation. As you know, we have 2 other parts of this session after the debate is finished. And the first one is a short round of feedback. Of course, after this match, you will have 3 judges that will independently review your arguments, will fill out a scorecard. They have 2 business days to send in the scorecards to the organizing team to validate. After the organizing team does the validation, the scorecards are shared with the teams, and also the results are announced on the social media for the competition. But first, you already have a chance to give a feedback on your performance, on the other team's performance, if you wish to share. So giving the floor to University of Manchester's Ms. Diallo. The floor is yours if there's anything you would like to share with the other team on the match.
Yeah, so I found this topic to be very technical because it's not something that I have really studied before. And doing research on it really helped me to gain more understanding and knowledge on the topic. And I really did enjoy the other team's submissions as well, because I learned a lot from you. And what you argued is not what I expected that you would argue. You framed the argument in another way, and I really enjoyed that.
Thank you very much. For our University of Akureyri, Ms. THIULDT, the floor is yours. If there's anything you would like to share with the other team.
Yeah, thank you. The same. I didn't expect the way you were going to argue it. I loved the references to all the cases you had. And just, it was, I expected perhaps more, I don't know, hostility, but I'm really glad that everyone's been so friendly. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Atassi, how did you find the debate?
I found it very interesting. It was interesting to see the difference in approach. I mean, we took a very principled approach in the sense that, is this principally legitimate or not? And then the impact that the opposition took of yeah, but what is the practical sense of how these international trade rules and laws work? So it was interesting to see the different conflict and approach between them.
Thank you. Ms. Ashlock, how did you find the debate? Was the topic something that you've already touched upon during your studies?
Yes, so last semester we all took an international law class. So this was actually a very relevant topic for the Polar Law program. Also, thank you to our opponents. It was very fun to debate. This is the first type of, I normally do debates that we're given the topic 30 minutes prior, and then we debate. So the research was very interesting. Also, really quick shout out to my partner, Hilder. This is her first proper debate that she's ever done.
Congratulations. And thank you for sharing. Mr. Dionisi, how did you find the debate? Was this topic something you've already touched upon during your studies, perhaps?
No, not really. When we've done international law here at the University of Manchester, we talk about a bit about the GATT and the economic inequality, but not really what happens in the WTO. And it's a dodgy subject because, like, I very much believe that it's mostly a political mechanism, and it's not legal, but it's kind of liminal. So there is room for debate, and this was very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. And once again, congratulations on your match earlier. And for the final part, we do have a little networking opportunity. After all, you are joining from 2 universities in 2 different countries. Also, if I'm not mistaken, 2 different levels of studies when it comes to law. So it would be quite interesting for you perhaps to learn a bit more about each institution and about your student lives. So I do have one question to start us off in regards to perhaps what the other team might be surprised to learn about your country or your university. If I can first give the floor to Mr. Atassi. What do you think could be a surprise for the opposing team to learn about your university or country?
I mean, it might have been a surprise before the debate, but I think you can probably tell that although we are based in England, Manchester, the university is very, very diverse. There are most students probably are not from England or from Manchester, and I think a lot of people. I was shocked when I first joined the university at the levels of diversity in our university.
Right. Ms. Ashlock, what do you think the other team might be surprised about your university or country?
So obviously I'm not from Iceland originally, and that is actually, for most of our polar law class, the only Icelandic is Hilder. The rest of the university is mostly made up of Icelandics. There's very few English programs. We have an exchange English program, modern studies is in English, and of course polar law. The rest is taught in Icelandic.
Well, thank you for sharing. Actually, the students from University of Akureyri's debate team are part of a very interesting program, if I'm not mistaken, that is Polar Law, master level studies, right? So if you would be interested, of course, we can put you in touch with each other. If you would like to stay in touch via email, of course, we also tag everyone on LinkedIn. So that's also another way. We have had students find their way to each other over the past editions. And on a different topic as well, perhaps for the University of Manchester, Ms. Diallo, if I can give a question, and that is, what is it that you look forward perhaps to learning in your studies? And given that you are currently studying for the undergraduate, if I'm not mistaken, is there anything that you would like to perhaps focus in your master's studies?
Yes, so I'm currently planning on doing a master's in public international law, actually, which is why this whole debate tournament was very interesting for me. And I guess something I'm very excited to learn about is just more about public international law, basically, because it is my favorite module that I'm taking this semester.
Thank you for sharing, Ms. Hafnild. As you are now in your master's studies, is there anything you would like to perhaps share with the students on the experience? Or if you can share with us, what are your plans for the next step?
So I'm gonna write my thesis next semester. Actually, I'm thinking of writing it on international taxation, taxation within the international field. So I'm very excited about learning about that because we haven't actually taken any classes in this. So, but I mean, I absolutely love researching. So didn't know very much about the WTO before this, and it absolutely is fascinating to try to cram like one semester's study into a week, basically. Yeah, I hope your studies go well and your paths lie perhaps into the international field and perhaps even to the University of Akureyri into the polar law program.
Well, thank you for sharing. Indeed, it's a little challenging, right? But to get the topic 7 days in advance. But it's the one thing that allows everyone to experience the different topics during the debate tournament. So you go from perhaps trade law one day to IP rights the next one. And then one final question, as we have 3 members from University of Manchester, so I'm just going to ask this one directly to Mr. Dionisi, and then the same question to University of Akureyri. You can choose which one of you would like to answer. And that would be a kind of more or less legal area. And it will be, what would you say is a true or false stereotype when it comes to UK or Manchester that you have discovered during your studies? And then the same question to University of Akureyri's team. What would you say is the true or false stereotype that you have found out about Iceland? So, Mr. Dionisi, floor is yours.
So for the true stereotype is that the weather is horrible, and it's just like makes it a very sad place to live into. So sorry, Abdullah, because I think you're originally from Manchester. I'm from Italy, where the sun shines every day. So it's difficult getting accustomed to this.
No,
but
I agree. It is the weather is horrible.
Unfortunately.
Hilda has texted me that I should answer. So as I've stated, I'm from Alaska. And so a lot of stereotypes that I had about Iceland was very rooted in like European stereotypes that I had. But I actually found that Icelandics are a lot like Alaskans. We have a lot of similar weather patterns, the same darkness, the same cold, and also a propensity for small town gossip. Which Hilda and I were just talking about maybe 2 hours ago with each other. Also, I really hope to get connected with all of you. You've all been so lovely to meet. And if you ever find yourself up north, feel free to let Hilda and I know.
Right. Well, thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure to host you for this match. We, on the side of organization, I look forward to sharing your scorecards and feedback from the judges with you. Wishing you all the best for the next steps. And of course, all the best for the rest of the week and early start to the weekend.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.